Hello, my name is Ainsley. On the morning of my wedding day, my sister handed me a plate of moldy bread and told me it was my breakfast. She said it with a smile. 10 minutes before that, she'd locked me in her basement, said it was just tradition, said our dad would have wanted it. But the thing is, this wasn't the first time she tried to erase me. It was just the first time I screamed loud enough. 3 times. Do you think anyone heard me? The string lights above the garden flickered gently, casting soft shadows across linen-covered tables. Jazz music flowed like warm syrup from the band at the far end of the courtyard, and guests moved gracefully under the canopy of magnolia trees. I'd chosen everything, every candle, every hors d'oeuvre, even the exact shade of pale blue for the linen napkins. This was supposed to be mine, my night, my announcement, my moment. I stood near the bar with Corvin, my fiancé, as guests trickled in, smiling warmly, arms open for hugs, some already holding flutes of champagne. For once, I thought, maybe I'd get to be the center of a room. It wasn't fame or drama I wanted, just the quiet dignity of being seen. Then I saw her. Isolde made her entrance like a scripted scene. Late, of course, 20 minutes after the speeches were supposed to begin. A deep red gown, open back, her dark hair in a polished twist that looked effortless and expensive. Every head turned. Conversations paused mid-sentence. I heard someone behind me whisper, "Now that's how you walk into a party." Of course it was. I didn't expect applause, but I didn't expect the air to shift so completely. One moment, the guests were scattered and cheerful. The next, they formed a gravity around her like orbiting moons. I tightened my grip on my glass and exhaled slowly. This wasn't new. Isolde smiled, that careful smile she wore like a weapon. "Sorry I'm late," she said, brushing past me and patting my arm. "I had a last-minute fitting." "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "Glad you made it." She kissed Corvin on the cheek, too close, too long, and whispered something that made him laugh. I looked at him sideways, but he was already reaching for another drink. I took my cue and approached the mic stand. The coordinator had nodded to me, signaling it was time for a few words. My few words. I glanced at my notes. Simple thanks, a memory of our first date, a nod to my grandmother who helped raise me. I barely got past "thank you all for being here tonight" before I heard a sharp ting-ting-ting. It was Isolde. She tapped her champagne flute with a spoon, hard and deliberate, and grinned. "Sorry to interrupt, but I just can't hold it in anymore." I froze. She wasn't supposed to speak. "I'm engaged," she said, holding up her hand like it was a trophy. Again! Applause broke out like someone had popped a balloon. People gasped and laughed and began to cheer. Someone shouted, "Third time's the charm!" She giggled and twirled the ring finger like a ballerina showing off a pirouette. My mic was still on. I could have said something, maybe a joke, a graceful pivot, but Corvin moved first. He stepped away from me and went to her. Of course he did. I stepped down from the mic and stood quietly as the crowd shifted. My speech crumpled in my palm. A man I barely knew patted my shoulder and said, "She always steals the show, doesn't she?" with a chuckle, like it was charming. 10 minutes later, the coordinator signaled the first dance. My first dance with Corvin, a way to refocus the night. As we took the floor, I exhaled again and nodded to the DJ. He knew the song I'd chosen. One I listened to while dreaming of this day. But instead of the gentle piano chords of my song, something else began. A pop remix that blared over the speakers. The theme song from Isolde's high school dance team. My jaw clenched. I looked at the DJ in confusion. He shrugged and pointed to his laptop. "This is the playlist I was sent." I turned toward my mother. She was sitting with her friends, watching like it was a performance. She met my eyes, shrugged lightly, and mouthed, "It's just music." No, it wasn't, not to me. Corvin didn't seem to notice. He spun me too quickly, missing the beat entirely. The dance ended awkwardly, with scattered applause. And right on cue, Isolde rose from her chair and led a small group of guests onto the floor, commanding the attention that had always been hers to take. I excused myself quietly. No one noticed. Inside the venue's small bathroom, I leaned over the sink. The light was too bright and the tile too white. I stared at my reflection. Lipstick perfect, dress crisp. Smile long gone. I didn't cry. I'd learned not to. There wasn't time. Not when someone like Isolde was always 2 steps ahead. Instead, I adjusted my necklace, blotted my lips, and looked at myself in the mirror like a soldier checks her armor. Not this time. I stepped out, walked past the dessert table, nodded at a guest who didn't remember my name, and returned to my table. No grand re-entry, no confrontation. That night, I went home alone. Corvin had stayed behind to help with cleanup. Of course he did. I changed into sweats, poured a glass of red, and sat cross-legged on the living room floor. I pulled out my laptop, opened a blank folder, and typed the title in all caps. Evidence. I didn't cry. I started documenting. Funny how people call it sibling rivalry when only one of us is bleeding. That was the thought that stayed with me the next morning as I sipped my lukewarm coffee, staring at the wedding invitation sample on my laptop. The font was delicate. The layout was clean. It looked exactly how I had envisioned, except it still felt wrong. Maybe it was because the image from last night kept playing in my head. Isolde's red dress, her hand in the air, that smug smile as the entire room cheered her engagement at my celebration. I clicked approve on the invitation draft and closed my laptop. I had fittings later that afternoon, but before that, I needed a mental reset. A walk, a shower, anything to rinse off the feeling of being invisible in a room full of people who swore they loved me. By the time I arrived at the boutique where my dress was being finished, the sky had gone from pale blue to the soft amber of late afternoon. The fitting room smelled of steamed silk and freshly brewed tea, a scent I normally found comforting. That day, it felt sharp and intrusive. Right on time, Janice, the seamstress, said cheerfully as she gestured for me to step onto the raised platform. We just finished prepping the bottom layer. Ready to see how it all comes together? I nodded and stepped behind the screen to change. My gown was a custom design I'd sketched out myself. Simple lines, a bit of lace at the shoulders, a flowing tulle skirt that whispered across the floor when I walked. It was the kind of dress that made you feel both protected and radiant. But the moment I stepped onto the platform, Janice froze. Wait! Oh no! My heart dropped before she even moved. She bent down, inspecting the hem of the skirt, and lifted the outer tulle layer. There it was, a tear just above the ankle, not jagged like an accidental rip. A clean cut, precise. I swear this wasn't here yesterday, she murmured. It had to be. Ainsley, I'm so sorry. Did it catch on something at home? I haven't worn it since last week, I said quietly. A beat later, the door opened. Wow, this place still smells the same, Isolde said, her heels clicking against the wood floor. God, remember my second wedding fitting? I fainted right there. She pointed at the very spot where I stood. Janice straightened, smoothing her hands on her apron. Afternoon, Isolde. She waved. Don't mind me, I just stopped by to drop something off. Oh. She leaned in toward the hem. What happened here? Janice began to explain, but Isolde cut her off. Probably the mirror stand. You should really watch those corners, Ains. Delicate fabric needs a delicate bride. She smiled as she said it, like she was just being funny. But her eyes, those eyes, held nothing but calculation. I didn't respond. I didn't even look at her. I stared straight ahead into the full-length mirror, trying to hold my posture, trying to breathe. Later that evening, back at home, I curled up on the couch with a blanket over my lap and a thick folder open in front of me. I added a new file. Dress hem incident. I included the timestamp, the photos. A quote, delicate fabric needs a delicate bride. That was the thing about my sister. She didn't yell. She didn't throw punches or raise her voice. She used smiles like knives, compliments like poison, and she always made sure there were witnesses to confirm she was just joking. The next day, while I was finalizing the seating chart and browsing centerpiece designs, I got a message from Lila, an old friend from college. Hey, is this real? Attached was a screenshot from a local wedding planning group. Someone had posted a photo of Isolde and Corvin, taken at a fundraising gala in college. It was an old picture, but still flattering, her hand on his shoulder, both of them laughing, wine glasses mid-air. The caption read, "Some things just don't fade, do they?" The comments were worse. Wait, didn't she used to date him? So, Ainsley was the rebound? I bet the sister still wishes it was her wedding. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then stood up and walked into the kitchen. Corvin was slicing an apple. Did you see this? I asked, holding out the phone. He glanced, shrugged. It's just a picture. From college, of you and her. He chewed and said, mouth half full. It was years ago. People are always digging up old stuff. She posted it. He paused. Come on, he said. You're not going to spiral over a picture, are you? You know Isolde, she's always been a little dramatic. He kissed my forehead like that settled it and went back to slicing fruit. I didn't argue. Not because I agreed, but because I knew there was no point. Later that night, I printed the screenshot, added it to the folder. Rumor circulation, photo source, Isolde. A few days after that, the printed invitations arrived. They were beautiful. Thick cardstock, gold-embossed letters, hand-lettered envelopes. I opened the first one with a kind of reverence, hoping, somehow, that something had gone right, but right there at the top, above the floral detailing, was my name, Ainsley Westbrook Isolde. Not Ainsley, not even Westbrook Corvin, which I would have understood. No. It was a hyphenated name that connected me, forever, to my sister. I flipped through a few more, hoping it was a typo on just one, but it wasn't. Every single one was printed that way. I called the print shop. Yes, the woman said. We have the order form right here. It was submitted under that name, by an Isolde Westbrook. I didn't even blink. Can you send me a copy of the order form? Sure, she replied. Would you like it emailed or printed? Both. My mother's voice on the phone later was predictable. It's just paper, Ainsley. No one will notice. Don't make this a thing. You think she did this by accident? I asked. She meant well. Maybe she thought it would be funny. Being erased is not funny. There was silence on the other end. Then, sweetheart, you've always taken things too personally. I hung up before I said something that couldn't be unsaid. That night, I updated the folder again. 3 new entries. One labeled Invitation Identity Manipulation. I labeled another matriarchal dismissal. Just for me. I didn't cry. Yet I started making copies. I sat there in the dim glow of my living room, legs folded under me, the folder spread open across the floor, like a map to something ugly but necessary. Page after page, screenshot after screenshot, details that didn't lie even when people did. My fingers hovered above a yellow post-it where I'd scribbled, rumor, intent to undermine reputation. But something deeper gnawed at me, something I couldn't categorize neatly. When did this even start? I muttered out loud. The silence in my apartment didn't answer, but my own mind did. It didn't start with the dress, or the invitations, or even the photo she leaked. It started long before, years ago. I just didn't know what to call it back then. Or maybe I did, but it was easier to believe it was just sisters being sisters, what everyone said when Isolde pushed too far. I reached for my glass of water and leaned back against the couch, eyes blinking slowly as the present began to dissolve into memory. And suddenly, I was 6 years old again. It was the night of my dad's birthday, back when birthdays still meant streamers and sheet cake and bad country music in the background. I'd been playing in the living room with a toy I wasn't supposed to touch, Isolde's porcelain ballerina. She was delicate, hands frozen mid-pose, her pink tutu glazed into ceramic perfection. She had been left on the coffee table. I wasn't being rough. I was just curious. I only wanted to twirl her once, but before I could even move, Isolde appeared out of nowhere like a ghost with a mission. She broke it, she cried, snatching the ballerina from my hand and smashing it dramatically against the tile floor. Dad came in just in time to see the aftermath. I tried to explain, tears already welling, but Isolde's performance was airtight. I told her not to touch my things, she sobbed, burying her face in Mom's skirt. She needs to learn consequences, Dad had said, voice like a gavel. Next thing I knew, I was locked in the hall closet. No lights, just jackets and dust and my own tiny sobs. I remember knocking gently, not pounding, just knocking, hoping someone might realize I was scared, even if I'd done something wrong. They never opened the door. That was the first time I felt it. The slow, heavy realization that being right didn't matter when someone louder could make you wrong. I blinked back to the present and stood slowly, stretching the stiffness from my back. The folder lay open at my feet like a crime scene, but now it felt incomplete. These weren't isolated attacks, they were a pattern, and the pattern had roots. I walked over to the bookshelf and pulled down an old photo album. Most of the pictures were glossy with time, curled at the corners, but I found the one I needed, my 9th birthday party. A backyard pool party. I remembered the streamers and cake, but what I couldn't forget was what happened in the water. I could see it clearly. The sun was high, the pool was crowded with neighborhood kids. Isolde had dared me to race her from one end to the other. I remember saying yes even though I hated putting my face in the water. We dove. Halfway across, I surfaced, gasping, and she was already there, waiting. Then, her hand on my head. A shove. I was back underwater. At first I thought she was just playing. But when I tried to come up, she pushed me back down. The panic came fast, kicking, thrashing, my lungs tightening. When I finally broke through, coughing and crying, she was laughing. "Don't be so dramatic," someone had said. I don't remember who. Maybe Mom. Maybe one of the other moms watching from the patio. "She was playing," Dad added. "You overreact." I didn't swim for the rest of the day. I sat wrapped in a towel, shivering, not from cold, but from the quiet knowledge that even near drowning could be rewritten as a joke if the right people said so. I placed the photo back and returned to the couch. There was one more memory, one I hadn't let myself think about in years. It still made my throat tighten. I was 12, middle school, the winter recital. I'd practiced for weeks. My music teacher had chosen me to sing a solo, not a duet, not a group number, just me. It was a small song, simple, but I'd been proud of it. I remember walking on stage, heart racing, lights in my face. The music began. I took a breath. And then, Isolde appeared beside me. Microphone in hand, smiling wide, she began singing with me, not harmonizing, not blending, just taking over. I looked at the music teacher, but she only smiled. The crowd clapped loudly at the end, most of them probably thinking it was planned. Our parents stood up, clapping like they'd just watched a Broadway show. A week later, they posted the video online with the caption, "Our girls lighting up the stage, proud big sister moment." I wasn't even tagged. I closed the photo album and stared at the ceiling. "She's been trying to mute me my whole life," I whispered. That wasn't self-pity, it was clarity. She didn't need to scream. She didn't need to throw punches. She just had to show up late, speak louder, and always stand closer to the spotlight. But I wasn't a kid anymore. I had a mic. I had a voice. I had proof. This time, I'd make sure my mic was turned on, and she couldn't reach it. By the time I pulled up to the inn, the sun had already begun its slow descent over the moss-draped trees, that soft, southern dusk that makes everything look prettier than it deserves. I sat in my car for a few extra seconds, staring out at the manicured hedges and white-paneled facade of the rehearsal venue. The building looked like something out of a wedding magazine, charming, dignified, polished. But even from the parking lot, I could feel it, the tension, that invisible thread pulling taut in my chest, warning me to brace for the next twist. 2 weeks. That's all that remained before the wedding. I walked into the private ballroom with a binder under one arm and my smile rehearsed, friendly, composed, unshaken. The room looked perfect. White linens, hydrangeas in pale blue vases, place cards lined up alphabetically. I'd designed it all. Finally, something that had stayed true to my vision. "Hey, Ainsley!" one of Corvin's aunts called out, her arms opening wide. "This looks absolutely gorgeous. It's all you, right?" I nodded, accepting her hug with a small smile. "It is." Took a few months, but I'm happy with how it turned out. You should be, she said, stepping back. You really pulled it off. For a fleeting moment, I felt grounded. Maybe, just maybe, I was gaining back a little control. Then the MC tapped a glass at the front of the room and called everyone's attention. All right, folks, time to walk through the flow of the big day. Let's go over who's speaking and when. I moved closer to the front, glancing at my binder. First, he began, we'll have a brief welcome from the maid of honor, followed by a toast from the mother of the bride. Wait. And then a short word from the sister of the bride. That's when I realized he'd skipped me. I raised my hand. Sorry, I said, trying to keep my voice even. I'm not on the list to speak? The MC looked at me, then flicked his gaze toward Isolde. She gave him the smallest shrug and a serene smile. Before he could answer, my mother's voice cut in from across the room. Let your sister speak for us, honey. You'll have your vows tomorrow. Tonight's about celebrating family. I blinked. Celebrate family. I felt my throat tighten, but I swallowed it down. Right, I murmured. Celebrating family. I backed away slowly, moving toward the edge of the room. The crowd murmured, unaware, or maybe unwilling to acknowledge, the tiny erasure that had just taken place. Again. I sat down at a nearby table, my fingers resting on the edge of the linen napkin like it was the only stable thing in the room. A few minutes later, the double doors swung open again. Every conversation paused. Isolde entered wearing a white floor-length jumpsuit, fitted to her body like it had been poured on. The sleeves were sheer, almost veil-like. Her hair was swept back in soft waves. She looked bridal. Too bridal. Gasps echoed subtly, followed by polite smiles. Someone at my table leaned over and whispered, "You both look like brides tonight." That's kind of sweet. I didn't respond. I just stared across the room as she made her way toward the front, soaking up the attention like it was hers by birthright. Corvin stood beside her, chuckling at something she said. I watched as she placed a hand on his forearm, casual but intimate. He didn't flinch. My fingers clenched under the table. No one else noticed. No one ever did. After the toasts and speeches, every single one of which included Isolde in some capacity, I excused myself quietly and slipped into the bathroom down the hall. My hands trembled as I gripped the porcelain sink. I stared at myself in the mirror, cheeks flushed, jaw set. This wasn't new. This was her game. She played it at birthday parties, graduations, even funerals. It wasn't enough to be admired. She had to dominate. She didn't just want the light. She wanted to make sure no one else even touched it. I tore off a piece of paper towel and dabbed the corners of my eyes, not from tears, but from sweat. Anger has its own heat. This is what she does, I whispered to my reflection. But not forever. I stepped out of the bathroom with slower steps, not timid, measured. As I re-entered the ballroom, the crowd was laughing at something Isolde had said. My mother sat with a beaming smile. Corvin was pouring champagne into her glass. I scanned the room, my family, my guests, my fiancé, and not one of them had said, "This isn't right." Not one. If no one was going to protect me from her, then I'd have to protect myself. And the next time she crossed a line, I wouldn't just record it, I'd confront her. She laughed, but I saw the crack. And this time, I planned to break it wide open. The following Sunday, I arrived at my parents' house for the pre-wedding brunch. A soft breeze stirred the wind chimes on the porch as I stepped out of the car. The air smelled like baked cinnamon rolls and cut grass. From the outside, everything looked like a Norman Rockwell painting. Inside, though, it was all noise, the clink of silverware against china, overlapping voices, the sound of Isolde's laughter rising above it all like a polished bell. I stepped in through the back, carrying a folder tucked under my arm. The folder, heavier now, stuffed with printouts and receipts. Every minor offense, every deliberate accident, documented and cataloged like evidence in a trial. The kitchen was crowded. My mother stood at the stove, flipping sausages. Dad leaned against the counter, sipping his coffee. Aunts, uncles, cousins. They were all there, chatting and helping themselves to mimosas. And right in the middle, Isolde held court in a pale blue linen dress, gesturing with a croissant as she told some story about a celebrity client. I didn't interrupt. I slid into a chair, offered polite greetings, and waited. "Hey, babe," Corvin said from behind me. He placed a quick kiss on my temple, then moved toward the fridge. "You want anything?" I shook my head, opening the folder slightly, my fingers brushing the edge of a tab labeled Venue Sabotage, Audio Playlist. "Ainsley, sit next to me," my mother called, gesturing toward the head of the table. I took the seat. My hands rested flat on the folder in my lap, but I kept my mouth shut. For now, the conversation shifted toward logistics, seating charts, dinner preferences, last-minute RSVPs. That's when Isolde said, "I actually took the liberty of adjusting the VIP seating, just to streamline things." My eyes flicked toward her. She smiled as she passed around a printed diagram. I scanned the chart. Corvin and I were placed at the third table, not the first. Our names were listed beneath the header, Close Family. Isolde and my parents were at the head table. Next to my name was a sticky note, Bride. No one said a word. Not a single person looked up from their mimosa. I let the silence stretch a beat longer. Then I reached into my folder and pulled out a printed seating plan, the original one I'd submitted to the planner. I slid it across the table toward my father. "Here's the version I approved 3 weeks ago, with everyone where they should be." Isolde blinked. "Oh, come on, it's a joke. Don't be so sensitive." I stood slowly, picking up my folder. "If there's one more accident, just one, I will walk down that aisle alone, and I promise you, I won't be the one who looks bad." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The room fell quiet. Isolde opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her smile flickered, just slightly, as if something behind it had cracked. My mother cleared her throat. "Sweetheart, don't make a scene." "A scene?" I said, my voice still calm. "You mean like rearranging my wedding without asking? Or sending out invitations with the wrong name?" "That was just a typo," she said too quickly. I turned to Corvin. "You okay with not sitting at the front?" He looked caught off guard. "I mean, if it keeps the peace." "That's all anyone ever says," I cut in. "Let's keep the peace, as if peace is silence, as if peace means letting her keep taking." Isolde's chair scraped against the floor. "You're being dramatic." I smiled. "No, I'm being precise." She rolled her eyes and reached for her purse. "I'll step out. Clearly, you're having a moment." She brushed past me with the grace of a woman who'd rehearsed exit scenes in front of a mirror. I didn't follow her. I sat back down. The room was awkwardly quiet. Forks scraped against plates. Someone coughed. Later, as the brunch wound down and guests began collecting their coats, I walked down the hallway toward the foyer. I didn't expect to see her standing there, Isolde, leaning against the wall near the coat rack, arms folded. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" she said, voice low. I didn't answer. She stepped closer, her tone shifting from performative to venomous. "You can't scare me. You've never mattered enough." I held her gaze, no flinching, no blinking, just seeing her, maybe truly for the first time. "I don't need to scare you," I said. "I just need to stop disappearing." She leaned in again, almost nose to nose. "You'll always be the girl who couldn't compete." "You mean the one who didn't want to?" I replied. I stepped back and walked away. At the far end of the hallway, near the door, my mother stood. I hadn't seen her until that moment. She was holding a dish towel in her hands, twisting it between her fingers. She'd heard the whole thing. Our eyes met. For the first time in years, there was something in her expression other than calm dismissal. Maybe guilt, maybe doubt. But she didn't say a word, again. I turned, pushed open the front door, and stepped out into the sunlight. She laughed, but I saw the crack. And this time, I planned to break it wide open. I didn't say a word during the final family dinner. I listened. I smiled when expected. I even helped fold the linen napkins my mother insisted on ironing herself. But every minute, I was watching Isolde. She moved like someone who believed the stage had been built for her alone, cutting through conversations, redirecting attention with perfect ease. That crack I saw in her facade during brunch, she had sealed it back up, smoothed over. And now, it was reinforced with layers of charm, wit, and designer perfume. But I'd seen it, and I wasn't forgetting. As the night wound down, Mom leaned across the kitchen island, wine glass in hand, and said, "Honey, you'll stay at Isolde's tonight, right? It's tradition, just like Aunt May and I did before her wedding. Corvin looked up from his phone. Wait, I thought you were staying here tonight? I can, I replied cautiously, but I don't want to make things complicated. Isolde, drying her wine glass with unnecessary elegance, chimed in. It's one night, just us. I promise no sabotage. She smirked, and everyone laughed, like we were in on a private joke. I hesitated, then nodded. Sure. Mom clapped her hands once. Perfect. That's how we've always done it. And just like that, the final nail was hammered into place. I followed Isolde to her house around 10 p.m. It was quiet, still, and pristine, as always. Her home smelled like jasmine and wood polish, a model home in a magazine that no one truly lived in. She handed me a robe and slippers, walked me upstairs, and pointed to the guest room. I set out your things. You'll find your makeup bag, extra hangers, and your wedding shoes. Didn't want you forgetting anything. I glanced at the room. My dress hung neatly in a zip-up garment bag, laid across the bed. A travel jewelry case sat on the nightstand. Everything was arranged, curated, perfect. Across the hall, her bedroom door remained half open. And if you need anything, she said, brushing invisible lint from the robe, just holler. I gave her a tight smile and stepped into the room. There was one strange thing. The guest room was right beside the basement door, a detail that wouldn't have meant anything if I hadn't seen her lock that door every time a client came over, as if there were something down there no one should see. Still, I brushed the thought away, too tired to argue with myself. I set my phone to charge, took a quick shower, and got into bed, dress bag still zipped tight beside me. Sleep came slowly, uneasy. My dreams were scattered and twitchy, wedding bells mixed with locked doors and moldy cake. At 6:27 a.m., there was a soft knock at the door. I sat up, rubbing my eyes. Isolde poked her head in, fully dressed, already in makeup. Hey, she said softly. Before everything starts, I wanted to give you something. It's downstairs. Just something from Dad. The words hung in the air. Something from Dad. I hadn't heard his name spoken by her in a long time. I got up slowly, curiosity trumping instinct for a split second. She led me down the stairs, barefoot, robe cinched tight. The basement door was already ajar. She gestured inside. I'll wait here, she said. I took a step down, and then another. About 5 steps in, I turned around, and the door slammed shut. A hard click echoed, sharp as a gunshot. I froze. My brain caught up to the moment 3 seconds too late. I bolted up the stairs, pounded on the door. Isolde! Silence. Open the door! Nothing. I jiggled the handle. Locked. From the outside, the faint sound of her voice came from behind the door. Just relax. It's your big day. Take a moment. I slammed my palm against the wood. What the hell are you doing? A pause. Then came a thump. A small paper plate slid under the crack. On it, a slice of bread, green around the edges, flecked with fuzzy blue. Breakfast in bed, little bride, she said sweetly. Then she walked away. I sat back slowly, my back pressed to the door. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a joke. This was strategic. I closed my eyes, breathed. I counted to 10. Then I whispered, "You just handed me proof." I stood up, scanning the dim basement. A single bulb flickered above, no windows, just old furniture, some paint cans, a broken treadmill, and dust. I spotted a rusted pipe near the back wall, and beside it, a bent screw, half sticking out of the floorboard. I picked it up. Sharp at one end, I knelt and scratched 3 words into the pipe's base. She locked me in. My hands shook, not with fear, but with purpose. This wasn't helplessness. This was fuel. I took off my necklace, Dad's, the one with the small gold disc, and wrapped it around my wrist. A reminder. A tether. I tightened it until it bit into my skin. Then I sat, not to cry, not to scream, to wait, to listen, because she locked the wrong woman in the basement. The basement was colder than it had been the night before, or maybe it just felt colder now that I'd been down there for a while, wrapped in borrowed quiet and concrete dust. I had no idea what time it was. My phone had 0 signal, and there wasn't even a ticking clock to pretend I could measure time by. All I had was breath and heartbeat. 1, 2, 1, 2, like I was drumming against my own fear. Somewhere above me, faint voices started to rise, laughter, music, the kind of casual buzz that only happens when guests begin arriving. I could hear the clink of glass, the low hum of conversation, the soft shuffle of feet over hardwood floors. My wedding guests. Isolde was upstairs, greeting them, smiling, probably making jokes about how I was taking my sweet time or being fashionably late. I sat in a folding chair, my dress from the night before wrinkled and thin, my fingers still marked with grime from scratching the pipe. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I wasn't scared, not in the way I would have been years ago. I wasn't planning on wasting any more time crying. She thought she could lock me down there and I'd crumble. That I'd miss the wedding, ruin my own reputation, give her the perfect narrative. She ran away, couldn't handle it, cold feet. She was good at stories, but she forgot. I'd started documenting everything, and I knew her better than she thought. I remembered something then, something from a long time ago. When I was 9, I had a babysitter named Claire. She was strict, never let us watch TV after 8 p.m. So Vanya and I created a code. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. It was our secret language, our way of saying, let me in or something's wrong. It hit me like a jolt of electricity. The vent in the corner. There was one near the floor, metal and slightly rusted. It connected to the air return system, open enough to carry sound if someone was listening for it. I stood, crossed the room, knelt down, and placed my ear close. I couldn't hear anything from there, but they might hear me, so I started knocking. 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Pause. 3 more. 1, 2, 3. Then silence. I did it again. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. I stopped. Listened. Nothing. I did it again. Again. Over and over, resting in between to preserve my strength. And then I whispered, "Hear me." Upstairs, Vanya was adjusting her earrings in the mirror near the entryway when she caught sight of Isolde chatting with guests. She looked radiant, animated, like the perfect hostess. Too perfect. Something in Vanya's gut twisted. She scanned the room again. No sign of Ainsley. No bridesmaids. No flurry of wedding prep. She approached Isolde. "Where's Ainsley?" Isolde blinked once. "Oh, she's not feeling well, just nerves. You know how she is." Vanya's eyes narrowed. "I don't. She'll be here soon," Isolde added with a dismissive wave. Vanya turned away, but the unease didn't leave her. Instead of heading to the ceremony area, she took a slow walk toward the side of the house, past the kitchen, and out to the garden. That's when she heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping, faint. She paused. Knock, 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 pause, knock, knock, knock. She froze. "No way," she whispered. She tilted her head, tracing the sound. It was coming from the vent near the back of the house, just under the window well. Her heart pounded. She ran, back inside, down the hall, straight to the basement door. It was locked. She pounded. "Ainsley?" Nothing. Then, faint. "Vanya?" Vanya turned and sprinted back into the foyer. "Isolde, where's the basement key?" Isolde blinked again. "What are you?" "She's in the basement." "You're being ridiculous." "I heard her knocking." Isolde's face shifted, just slightly. Vanya stepped forward. "Open the door." "I don't have the key." "Call 911, Vanya said to the nearest person. Then, without waiting, she ran back down the hallway, phone already to her ear. 911, what's your emergency?" "My friend's been locked in a basement. It's her wedding day. She's the bride." The operator began asking questions. Just then, Vanya noticed a small brass latch hidden behind a decorative wall sconce near the baseboard. Her fingers slid across it. Click. The door gave way. Vanya pulled it open and rushed down the stairs. There I was, standing up slowly, blinking against the sudden flood of light. My voice rasped. "Took you long enough." Vanya nearly tackled me in a hug. "Are you okay?" I've been better, I whispered. But I'm still getting married. She helped me up the stairs just as the police arrived. Isolde stood frozen at the top of the landing. Her expression flickered. Fear, defiance, embarrassment, but she didn't speak. I stepped past her. I need a shower and my dress. Then I paused and looked her in the eye. You tried to erase me today, I said, but instead you just gave me an entrance they'll never forget. The officer gave me a bottle of water as I stepped out of the patrol car, my feet touching the pavement just outside the riverside venue. I could hear the music now, soft violins floating from the courtyard, guests chatting under white tents, oblivious to the chaos that had been unraveling just a few blocks away. A faint breeze caught the hem of my backup dress as I took a slow breath, then turned to Vanya. Ready? She asked, her voice low, steady. I nodded. Inside, the ceremony had already started. Isolde stood at the front of the aisle, immaculate in her crisp white jumpsuit. She looked relaxed, pleased, radiant. Guests murmured, casting glances toward the entrance. The bride wasn't there, and no one had answers. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Someone said I'd run off. Another mentioned stage fright. Someone even speculated I'd changed my mind. Isolde smiled softly and leaned toward the officiant. She's not coming, she said, just loud enough for the front row to hear. Cold feet. Then the doors opened, and I walked in, not rushing, not flustered, just walking, each step deliberate. Vanya beside me, her arm looped through mine. Her eyes stayed ahead, her face calm. The room stilled. No one stood, no one spoke. I walked past the guests, past the rows of chairs, past the shocked faces and dropped jaws, past Isolde, who didn't move at first, her smile faltering as she processed what was happening. She stepped back, just slightly, unsure of whether to confront me or act as though she wasn't surprised. I ignored her. At the head table, I placed 2 items gently on a white linen cloth. The first, the rusted padlock, heavy and unmistakable. The second, a small silver dessert plate. On it, the moldy piece of bread she'd so generously offered hours earlier. The gasps started slowly, then built. People shifted in their chairs. I could hear the words now. What is that? Is that bread? Why would she bring that here? I let the questions sit, then I looked across the room. To my mother, whose mouth had fallen open. To my uncle, who had already pulled out his phone. To the guests who had come for a wedding and now found themselves in the middle of something else entirely. I didn't speak. Not yet. Instead, I walked toward the mic. But before I could open my mouth, someone else stood. From the 3rd row, leaning on a cane, Great Aunt Ruth rose slowly to her feet. The oldest person in the room, the most respected, the one who had known all of us the longest. She didn't need a microphone. We all saw who she really is today, she said, her voice clear as glass. And I'm ashamed it took this long. The air shifted. Isolde turned toward her. Ruth, Don't, Aunt Ruth interrupted, raising one hand. You don't get to explain your way out of this one. Isolde's mouth opened again, then shut. Twist the truth all you want, but some moments can't be rewritten. And this was one of them. I stepped forward again, now ready to speak. But I didn't launch into a speech. I didn't lay out a timeline, didn't show the photos, didn't list the times she'd humiliated me in public or undercut me in private. I said one sentence. This isn't about revenge. I let that settle. This is about making sure she never does it again. And then I stepped back. That was all. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just let the weight of it all land where it needed to. The fallout began faster than I expected. By the time the first dance would have started, Vanya had already uploaded the clip of me exiting the basement. It had gone live minutes earlier, catching the exact moment officers escorted me out and asked questions Isolde refused to answer. Side-by-side comparisons flooded social media. Me walking into the wedding in a plain white dress, Isolde beaming in her all-white ensemble moments earlier. Screenshots from the video of the padlock, the bread, the plate, the stunned faces. One by one, sponsors began withdrawing from Isolde's brand partnerships. Emails started coming in. Clients canceled. Collaborators stepped back. Pending further clarification, they wrote in their statements. Isolde stayed quiet for the rest of the evening. Not a word. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She left before dessert. And no one stopped her. I stayed. I danced with Corvin. I toasted with Vanya. I laughed with Aunt Ruth. Not because I needed the party, but because I wanted to own what she tried to take. They said weddings are about beginnings. Mine was a reckoning. The story didn't end with a bouquet. It started with a broken chain. The paperwork sat on the notary's desk, bland and bureaucratic, printed in plain 12-point Times New Roman, each line filled with legal clarity and none of the emotion it represented. No drama, no confrontation, no shouting matches or courtroom gasps. Just ink, paper, and a name waiting to be signed. I picked up the pen, held it in my hand for a beat longer than needed. Not because I was unsure. I was sure. But because I knew, once I wrote this, something fundamental would shift. Not loud and explosive, but quiet and permanent. Ainsley West. Not Westbrook. Not the name attached to her legacy. Not the name that weighed down every certificate, every account, every legal document. Just mine. Just me. There were no cinematic fireworks. No triumphant swell of music in the background. But I did feel something shift. It was like shrugging off a coat I didn't realize I'd been wearing every single day of my life. Heavy, hidden, lined with someone else's story. The notary looked up after stamping the final page. She offered me a small smile, one that was both official and oddly sincere. "Congratulations," she said. "Here's to a fresh start." I nodded, folded the papers neatly, and slipped them into my canvas bag. Outside, late spring had rolled in with confidence. Warm air and blue sky, azaleas blooming along the sidewalk. The courthouse steps behind me felt steep on the way up, but somehow easier going down. I didn't rush to my car. Instead, I walked, no real destination. Just needed time to let it all settle into my bones. I let the breeze move through my hair, let the soft hum of Charleston traffic and birdsong blur together. I passed a small cafe on the corner I hadn't noticed before. There was a chalkboard out front with a message scribbled in pink chalk. "Bloom where you're planted." It made me laugh, genuinely. A low, startled chuckle in the middle of the sidewalk. Because I'd spent years trying to bloom in someone else's shadows, someone else's soil. And now, I finally had my own plot of ground. Back at my apartment, new keys, new lease, no traces of the past. The scent of eucalyptus and fresh laundry wrapped around me like a soft exhale. The space was minimalist by choice. Clean white walls, pale wood furniture, open shelving, no clutter. Nothing from the past to cloud the present. No photos of Isolde. None from childhood. Nothing I didn't choose. My laptop was open on the dining table, next to a small podcast mic and a compact soundboard. I'd recorded episode 1 just a week earlier. It was raw, unpolished, honest. The kind of honesty I once feared would unravel everything. The podcast was called Basement Light. Not a flashy title, but it fit. Because light in dark places matters more than anywhere else. I didn't name names in the episode. I didn't have to. I spoke about being silenced, about being disbelieved. About what it means to lose your voice. Not because someone took it, but because people chose not to hear it. I talked about the basement, not just the physical one, but the metaphorical basements people get locked into, by family, by fear, by expectations dressed up as love, the places where truth is too inconvenient, where silence becomes survival. The episode had barely gone live when the first message arrived. This happened to me too. Then more. I thought I was alone. My sister gaslit me for years. I still struggle to trust my own memories. Thank you. You said what I've been afraid to put into words. Within 24 hours, it had over 1,000 downloads. By the end of the week, 10,000. I hadn't set out to create a movement. I wasn't even sure I wanted to be heard that widely. But maybe that's how real things begin, with one woman, one voice, finally refusing to whisper. That evening, I lit a candle on the coffee table. The scent was sandalwood and sea salt, warm and grounding. I sat cross-legged on the couch, sorting through the flood of DMs and emails, prepping notes for episode 2. Then my phone buzzed. A number with no name. But I knew exactly who it was. The message read, "You didn't have to go that far. But of course you did. You always needed an audience." I stared at it for a full minute. My thumb hovered over the screen. I felt nothing. No anger, no fear, no need to respond. I tapped archive. Then, out loud, just for myself, I said, "She still doesn't get it. And that's not my problem anymore." The next morning, I drove to the coast. There was a small, almost forgotten beach hidden between private homes and weathered dunes. My father used to bring me here when I was little. He'd pack peanut butter sandwiches and red Gatorade in a cooler, and we'd sit under a striped umbrella while waves lapped at the shore. I hadn't been back in years. I kicked off my sandals and walked barefoot along the waterline. The wind was brisk, salty, the kind that made your lungs sting in the best way. It didn't hurt. It purified. In my hand, I held a small, rusted chain link, a piece of the basement restraint. The police had returned it after closing the case. Standard procedure, they said, for evidence review. I could have thrown it away, could have let it rust in the back of a drawer, but I kept it. Not out of vengeance, but because it was part of the truth. It had bruised my ankle, left a faint scar, low on my skin, just above where socks usually end. I looked down now. The scar was still there, faded, pale, but present, and that was okay. "It doesn't hurt anymore," I whispered. "But I keep it. Not for her. For me. Not to remember what she did, but to honor what I survived." I crouched near the edge of the tide, dug a small hole in the wet sand, and laid the chain link inside. The ocean would find it. Let it wash out with the tide. Let it belong to no one. No more chains. No more silence. No more minimizing my voice so someone else's story could stay neat and pretty. I stood a while longer, the water pulling gently at my toes, the horizon stretching wide and untamed before me. And when I turned to leave, the only sound behind me was the wind and waves. And that, finally, was the kind of silence I could live with. As I walked back up the beach, I whispered one last thought into the air, the kind that didn't need a response. They gave me mold. I planted seeds. I don't wait for permission to bloom anymore. Some chains are made of metal. Others are made of silence. If you've ever felt erased, overlooked, or pushed aside in your own family, this story is for you. Not to relive the pain, but to remind you your voice matters, even when they try to silence it. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you were expected to love unconditionally? Let us know in the comments. And then don't forget to subscribe if you want more real, raw family stories that dig deep, hit hard, and heal quietly.